This podcast is brought to you by Contessa Digital.
Have you ever been Captain Save-A-Ho? Yeah, I know normally we use that term to refer to men who try to save women, but all too often I see women in that role trying to save a man from himself. And I want to talk about my own experience with this. Yes, so we live and we learn, right? And I want to talk about what I learned from it. So, welcome to Confidently Cherished. My name is Keshia Rice. I am a dating coach and hypnotherapist. I help women heal from their unhealthy patterns and create healthy, loving relationships. And, it's funny. I was talking to a woman a few days ago, and she was telling me that she was afraid of being old because she was about to have her 25th birthday. And I told her not to worry about it because, at this point, there's a 3 at the front of my age. And I am not afraid to say that my 20s absolutely sucked. Like, they sucked so hard, right? And, something about being in my 30s now. I know this isn't the case for everyone, but for me, I am more confident in who I am as a person. I am more confident in my body. I have more of an attitude of, this is me, take it or leave it. And not in a flippant way, not in a I don't care about people way, but in a way that I have to do what's best for me and protect myself. And if I want healthy, real relationships, then I can't have real relationships being fake, right? Being something that I'm not. So, my 30s have been pretty awesome for me, honestly. Not that they haven't been without conflict. Not that I haven't had any problems, but compared to my 20s, definitely. And, I still have several years in my 30s to go. So I'm looking forward to how this decade in my life pans out. But back to this whole idea of being a Captain Save-A-Ho, I realized that one of the reasons why my 20s sucked so much was my relationships with men. And there is one particular relationship that I was involved in right before I met my husband that proved to be very fruitful in helping me make some important discoveries about myself. So I'm a bit ashamed to admit this. Actually, no, I'm not. I would have been ashamed to admit this. But now when I think about it, again, it is what it is. And I know I'm not the only person who's ever been in a situation like this. But years ago, I was completely infatuated with someone that I was not even dating. So this guy was a friend of mine. He and I had known each other for a few years. And just over the time of getting to know him, I had built up this idea of what he and I could have been, right? So again, I had no evidence that he and I could have been what I thought because we had never dated. And yes, I am very fond of telling you that all relationships are related. And they are when it comes to the patterns and your ways of being and your behavior. But at the same time, a friendship with someone of the opposite sex is very different than dating someone of the opposite sex. Things change when you allow romantic feelings to get involved. So, as friends, I thought that he was a great guy. I thought he was, good looking. He was funny. He was smart. He checked off a lot of boxes in what it was that I wanted in a romantic partner. And I think especially because during the time period that I knew him, I had been in so many bad situations. So when I say situations, I mean, yes, men that I actually had a relationship with that I dated for several weeks or a few months. But I also, I was doing the online dating thing, and I was also being really intentional about meeting people in person. So between those two, I was going on a lot of dates. And yeah, in some ways that's a blessing. Like, I was able to really get clear on what it was that I wanted in a relationship because, trial and error. I was able to, meet all kinds of interested men. So yeah, there were definitely some benefits, but at the same time, because I was going on a large volume of dates, I was also going on a lot of trash dates, right? That whole idea of you have to kiss a lot of frogs before you find your prince, right? And because of that situation, and also because at one point I was not going on a lot of dates. I had settled on seeing this one guy in particular, and that turned out to be a pretty unhealthy situationship, right? This friend of mine, he follows me on social media and all, and I don't think he knows that the story is about him, so I'm not going to use his real name. We're going to call him Derek, okay? So, I was going through all these trash situations, and Derek always seemed to have the answer, and a really good one, right? I would tell him about the things that were happening, and he'd always be like, "Oh, that's just crazy," or that's so dumb that he would act that way. And then he would tell me about how he would have handled the situation instead. And hearing his responses, of course, like, I started building up this idea of like, well, you know what, if Derek and I were together, I wouldn't be so stressed out all the time. I wouldn't be going through all of this. And here's the thing. It wasn't until Derek and I, because of circumstances, just ended up spending less time together. And no, there wasn't some big friendship breakup or anything. Schedules changed, jobs changed, just lifestyles changed. I started dating my husband and spending more time with my husband. Just all these different things that were not close like we used to be. But it was in that distance from him that I realized all of this time that I had painted him to be so perfect, right? So great. He was stressing me out just as much as the other men that I was dealing with at that time. So, I've always been the type that if I can help out other people, I will. I come from a family of both ministers and a family of military on both sides of my family. So the idea of serving others, lending a helping hand is something that is pretty ingrained in our family values, right? So it comes naturally to me, and I have definitely, I'm working on this process now of doing some inner work, getting back in touch with my inner child, releasing some soul ties and all that. And it is in the whole process of my self-development journey that I learned, I had a bad habit of constantly stepping in with people, trying to save the day, and then burning myself out in the process. So this was the case with Derek. I told other people constantly how great he was, how amazing he was, and all these things that he was doing with his life. And it wasn't until we had some distance in our relationship that I recognized a lot of his greatness was me. And I don't mean that to be haughty or bragging or anything like that. But what I mean is, so at one point in our friendship, he was in a relationship with this woman, and it seemed like the two of them were really serious about each other, that things in their relationship were going very well. And she was so enamored by him, like just as infatuated as I was probably. And, I realized that over the course of their relationship, she would talk about romantic things that he would do. And by the way, there is a plane overhead, and I don't know what the heck is happening, but if you can hear that, I apologize. But again, over the course of their relationship, she would talk about romantic things that he would do for her. And I realized that a lot of those things were my ideas, right? A lot of the things that she was fawning over were things that I had come up with. And it wasn't just his dating life. It was, I had made suggestions over how he could improve his style, how he dressed, how he looked. And he took those suggestions, and then suddenly people were complimenting him all the time. When it came to his career, I had helped him with his resume and his cover letter. He worked in a field that I was very familiar with. So I even helped him with some of his work assignments that got him praise for that. And I'm not trying to slam him. He was smart on his own. And I also don't feel like he intentionally used me or abused me. But people will always do what you allow. And I think he saw someone who was being helpful and supportive, and he accepted that help and support, not realizing the dynamic that was causing in our relationship, right? Not realizing that because, he was so grateful for my help and all that sometimes I may have interpreted that as him being more interested than he was. Because I was doing so much, and yes, he would be grateful and thank me for doing things. But after a while, the relationship started to feel like it wasn't reciprocal. And by the time he and I started spending less time together, I definitely had some resentment built up at that point. So I say this because, again, he and I started having some distance from each other around the same time that I met my husband. And when I think about what was going through my mind at the time of this, there was never an official friendship breakup. Like, in fact, I could message him right now and he would respond back and he would ask me how I was doing. So it's not like there was some drama or anything like that. Again, it was more of a, we fizzled out. We don't really talk to each other like that anymore. But when I think about what was the end of, I guess, that level of closeness that he and I had at one point, I started to realize that it wasn't just him, right? So this was a case where this was a man. So, I am cisgender, heterosexual. So this was a man that I was friends with and I had done this for. And in the process, I had become infatuated and wanted something more. But I had done this in a lot of my previous romantic relationships. I had always tried to save the men I was dating. And when I say save the men that I was dating, I think about Beyonce's song, Upgrade You. And that's what I would tell myself I was doing, that I was just upgrading men and making them better, that being in my presence made them better, and that I knew I could do that. And that I was so good at helping people and giving advice, which is funny because I was not a coach at the time, but the clues were there. The clues were there at the time, that finding a way to serve others and help others was going to be a big part of my life. But I realized in dealing with Derek and reflecting back on some of my other relationships that I had been hell bent on saving men that couldn't be saved, right? So there was a pattern in a lot of my relationships. And that pattern was, I grew up in a 2-parent household. My parents have been married for, I am drawing a blank on how long they've been married, but I know it's close to 40 years. They are 30 something years married. They were married a few years before I was born. So, I grew up in a 2-parent home. Parents were married. I also grew up a preacher's kid, and my parents are by no means perfect, right? No one's parents are. But at the same time, I definitely grew up in a household where I felt loved. And even in times where I feel like my parents did not do the best things or did not make the best decisions, I still know that the decisions that they made came from good intentions, right? And that some of the things that they did were just a matter of ignorance or, things that they had not healed from themselves. So because of that, that's what happens. If one generation doesn't heal from something, it gets passed to the next generation. So, I know I grew up in a household where I was very blessed and I had a lot of privileges that others didn't have. And I had a habit of attracting men who did not have those privileges, right? So oftentimes I attracted men who grew up in single parent homes, who their family household income was a lot less than the level of household income that I grew up in. And not only that, but they didn't just have a rough start in life, right? A lot of the men that I dated had continuously rough situations in their life and struggled with a lot of things. And this was even men who were successful, because I remember at one point thinking, okay, well, I just need to stop dating the quote unquote thugs, right? And it wasn't just that. I dated men who overcame a lot of adversity and were able to become, doctors or lawyers or do something in the corporate world and had high paying jobs and were no longer, in some ways they were worlds and worlds away from that life of poverty that they grew up in. But in other ways, when it came to dealing with the emotional trauma when it came to dealing with feelings of hurt or neglect or being abandoned. Again, a lot of times I dated men who came from a single parent household and they felt abandoned by the parent that left. They hadn't healed from these things. So because they hadn't healed from these things and they hadn't really learned how to love, how to be in a healthy and whole relationship, I often took it onto myself to try to save them, right? To be like, oh, okay, well, you're not getting a lot of love in your family, but that's fine. Like the love that I've been shown growing up, I can show that to you. I can help you. I can show you what it's like to have someone who is caring and loving and who is truly down for you and there for you. And in so many instances, I was trying so hard to be down for someone that I ended up being dragged down by them. And it wasn't until the whole situation with Derek came to a head that I realized all of this. So, like I said, at some point, Derek and I just, again, schedules change and things like that, and we kind of fizzled out. But there was a moment before that happened, right? And that moment was I had come out of a really terrible situationship. Technically, this guy and I, you could say we were dating, but it was clear that if I had stayed in that, we were going to be dating forever, right? He had no plans, no intention of committing. In fact, this was several years ago. He still, as far as I know, we have mutual friends. So as far as I know, he still is the same way with not wanting to really commit and be in a relationship. So I ended things with that guy because I was just like, if I'm going to be serious, this was when I first started my whole personal development journey, right? So, I told myself like, hey, if you're really serious about having healthy relationships, if you're really serious about finding that partner and getting married, you can't be 1 foot in and 1 foot out, right? Like, I couldn't be in a situation where I was still dating someone because I was bored and afraid of being alone while actively going out and saying that I wanted to have the real thing, be in a real healthy relationship. So I let that go. And I remember having a conversation with Derek about it. And I didn't come right out and say it, but I hinted at the fact that I had feelings for him. And again, I didn't come right out and say it, but I guess I said enough for him to catch on. And he let me know without him coming right out and saying it. He found his own way of letting me know that it was never going to happen. That he didn't see me that way and that he never would see me that way. And I remember after our conversation, after that moment, being devastated by that and crying and being upset. One of my favorite groups, this is going to sound random, but it's not. One of my favorite groups is called Moonchild. And if you would like, go to your music store. I'm an Apple fangirl myself. So, you can go to Apple Music or go to Spotify or even go to YouTube. Look up the music video. There's a song called The List. And that song kind of describes how I felt about Derek, right? So I remember being highly upset about that situation, because even then at that moment, we didn't officially really start to fizzle out until maybe a couple months later. But I feel like that was kind of really the end of our relationship being the way it was when that conversation happened. And I remember being so upset about it and then kind of realizing like, hey, nothing that I had experienced over, we were friends for a few years, but really that last year of our friendship was when I started to feel like more feelings for him. And, I came to the conclusion that none of that year was real. Like, yes, it existed. It happened. The time that we spent together, it was time we spent together. But this whole relationship that I had wanted and was hoping for and everything was all happening in my head. And it was happening in my head with a man who was not capable of giving me what it was that I wanted in a relationship. This is the thing that a lot of women fail to see. And before anyone says it, yes, a lot of men too, but I work with women, so I will be talking about women. If you are a man and you're listening to this episode, I appreciate you. I am grateful for you. Know that, yes, this applies to you too, but I will be referring to women. So this is the thing that a lot of women struggle with, is they believe that they can love someone hard enough to create change. They really take that phrase, be the change you wish to see, a little bit too seriously. And too often women think, okay, he has unhealthy patterns. I can demonstrate, I can show, I can teach him what healthy love looks like. If I love him harder, then he'll appreciate me more. If I love him harder, he'll understand what love is and he'll reciprocate. And that's all good and lovely and sweet. It really is. It's just not how life works, right? I'm not saying that someone who comes from a disadvantaged background can't be in a healthy, loving relationship, because it happens all the time. And when I say disadvantaged background, I'm not talking economically disadvantaged. I'm talking emotionally disadvantaged. So having parents that didn't want to be around all the time, or because of finances couldn't be around all the time, constantly working. And because of that, sometimes kids end up feeling neglected or abandoned, even though they had parents who tried their absolute hardest. And when it comes to this, we have to recognize that for some people, it's not that they don't care about us. It's not that they don't love us. It's that they aren't equipped. They don't have the tools. They are not capable of loving us in the way that we need to be loved. And I don't want to say that's okay, but yeah, that's okay. We have to be at a place within ourselves that we accept that this person cannot give us what we need. And we can hope for them, we can pray for them, but we have to send those hopes and prayers while we're also sending them out of our lives. If this person truly wants to heal from their unhealthy relationships, we are not emotional rehabs, right? They are going to have to come to the end of themselves. They're going to have to come to a place in their lives where they actively seek out help. This is the difference. People will hear what I'm saying and misconstrue it to say that I told them that you have to be perfect to be in a relationship. And I absolutely have not said any sort of thing. But what I am saying is, if you have a background that has led to you developing some unhealthy traits, unhealthy patterns in your relationships, then it is also on you to heal that. It is on you to do the inner work, to do the journaling, the meditations, to find a coach or find a therapist. It is on you to do that work to heal. And then, yes, if someone in your journey wants to help you help yourself, then that's great, but they can't do the heavy lifting for you. You have to be able to do a lot of the work yourself, because it is you, is your life, is your body. It is your sense of adventure, right? You can't hold other people emotionally hostage to you deciding what it is that you want and don't want. So I know this episode has carried on a little long. We're beyond 30 minutes, but I just want to give the message to all of you who have a little bit of Captain Save-A-Ho tendencies. And if you don't think I'm talking to you, I would ask you to make sure. Go back and look at your previous romantic relationships, and also look at your friendships and whether or not you've ever tried to save a friend for themselves. So I just want to remind people like this that there's nothing wrong with you. You love people, you want to help people, but you need to have proper boundaries in place. You need to protect yourself first before you can help others in the ways that they need to be helped. You also need to understand that sometimes love is not enough. As much as you may love someone and care about them and want them to do better, live better, be better, they can't do those things until they want it for themselves. And if you are so hell-bent on trying to fix other people, what you will instead do is set up a recipe for resentment on both ends. You will resent all the work that you put into this relationship, and they will resent you mothering and smothering them. So let me know what you think. Let me know your experiences with Captain Save-A-Ho on either side. If you're the one that someone was trying to save, or if you're the one trying to be the saver, let me know about your experience. I am on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Keshia Rice, KESHIA RICE. So share your thoughts. Take a screenshot of this episode and share it to your stories. Let me know what you think and what your experiences are. And I will talk to you soon. Love you so much. Bye. Hey there. So you made it all the way to the end of the episode, which means I have two things to say. One, thank you so much. I truly appreciate it. And two, you like me. You really like me. So I would appreciate it if you would show that like by subscribing to this podcast so that more people can hear about it and enjoy it as much as you do. And if you want to know more about any of the links that I mentioned on this episode or any guests that I've had, be sure to go to KeshiaRice.com/links. That's KeshiaRice.com/links. I can't wait to talk to you again in the next episode. So see you then.